So this week took an unexpected turn of events because my garden assaulted me. Technically, the attack happened about 3 weeks ago, and then I spent about 2 weeks walking around with a broken finger, telling myself everything was fine, even though I suspected it might not be. So it happened when I was clearing out the front flower bed. To regular viewers, better known as the ninth circle of hell, I was dealing with a particularly stubborn, really deep root, and I, perhaps unwisely in retrospect, wrapped a root around my hand and I think around my finger, and then pulled with all my might and snapped it. And it hurt like the bejesus the moment it happened. And I even told my husband at the time, I think I might have broken my finger, but I'm going to wait and see how it is before going in. Because when's it ever a bad thing to ignore something medical and just wait and see, right? And this is probably the time to confess that back when I was young, I was a surgical nurse. And although I haven't done it for a really long time, I always tell people that if nothing else, I always know when it's time to go to emergency. I think it's time to rework that line because I always know when it's time for someone else to go to emergency. When it comes to me, I am yet again the victim of my poor choices. But this is where my Canadian conditioning kicked in. These days in Canada, there isn't a lot of rushing when you need medical care. Going to emergency involves usually a 12, 14, even 18-hour wait to be seen. And so most of us tend to avoid going at all costs and hope that things are not serious and we can manage on our own. Anyways, it didn't hurt all that bad. So I just carried on with my life for a couple of weeks, telling myself everything was just fine and it would sort itself out. After a couple of weeks, though, I started to notice that it still seemed to be swollen and was kind of red and was more crooked than it was supposed to be. And so I was getting suspicious at that point that, yeah, it was probably more than just a sore, twisted finger. In Canada, my options would have been to go to emergency and wait for, as I said, 12, 14, 18 hours. Or you could go to a walk-in clinic. There aren't as many as there used to be, but you have to go at about 6:30 in the morning, wait in line outside until they open and hope that you can get an appointment for later that day. If you can't, you come back the next day and wait in line and hope for an appointment. And so again, this is why people don't always get help when they should. And so this is when I entered the Star Trek universe. Here in my part of France, I was able to go to a pharmacy and with no wait time do a teleconsult with a doctor on this nifty space age consulting machine, or as I call it, my robot doctor. You talk to a doctor on the video screen, and the console contains basic examination instruments like a pulse ox monitor, a blood pressure cuff, otoscope, etc. You use the instruments on yourself as they tell you to, and the doctor sees what the scope is seeing on the other side of things through a camera. In my case, I just needed to hold my bent finger up to the camera for him to determine that, yeah, it was probably broken. But honestly, I really wanted to stuff something in my ear just so I could examine myself and see it on the screen. So yeah, a quick look determined that yes, it was very likely broken. And so the doctor issued a request for an x-ray, which was printed out at the pharmacy. And then I was on my way to the radiology lab. So another thing that's different here from what I'm used to back home is that they have doctors on hand at the radiology lab that review your x-ray while you're standing right there. And in my case, yes, my finger was broken and it was a bit of a problem because it had been beginning to heal for 2 weeks and not healing quite straight. And so I was given my x-ray. Something else that's different, we actually keep our x-rays here. And so x-ray in hand, the other hand, I was off to emergency. Emergency room in France for me was very similar to what I'm used to in terms of format, although it was a lot quicker and it felt more civilized. Last time I was in emergency in Canada, it felt a lot like Dante's Inferno. This one was quieter, not as much blood and screaming and chaos. And it took me about 3 hours in and out, which is the shortest emergency room visit I've ever had. The finger was examined and splinted, and a consult was set up with a surgeon for a couple days later to see whether or not they'd need to operate to correct the crookedness. A big ego boost and success for the day was that I managed the whole thing on my own in French, came out with the correct body part dealt with. So my French must have been adequate for that. And it wasn't really a problem. So that was a good feeling moving forward to know that, okay, I can manage at least some emergency situations. The medical staff were a bit baffled as to why I didn't come in 2 weeks ago, and I didn't dare confess that I was also a nurse. I really should have known better. I did try and explain what emergency room waits are like right now in Canada and how you basically have to pack a sleeping bag and a week's worth of rations before you go in. The surgical consult was quick and easy. It happened at a different hospital again, and they determined that there was no need to operate and we'll just let it be. It's going to heal a little bit crooked, and I'll never really be able to straighten it fully. But of my 10 digits, I'm right handed, so of my 10 digits, this one's the most expendable. I'll go up for a follow up consult and x ray in a month, but for now, all's well that ends well. So we've accessed the healthcare here and there in bits and pieces since we've arrived at various appointments and this and that. But this is the first healthcare event we've had. Although there was a bit of going from place to place because first it was the robot doctor, then the x-ray lab, then emergency, and then a couple days later to this surgical hospital, everything felt really, really streamlined and simple. Everyone I encountered was very, very kind. No one spoke English, but everyone was really patient and professional, and it was a positive experience beginning to end. There was no cost to me because everything was covered by a combination of our public health insurance and our mutuelle. Mutuelle is an additional insurance that most everyone carries. It's not very expensive. I think we spend about €70 a month for the two of us. And that covers the bits that aren't covered by the public system. So in the end, no, I'm wrong. I had to spend €7 for use of the robot doctor, but I may actually get that back. The high point, without question, was the Star Trek doctor, because that's the coolest thing I've found in France since the baguette vending machines. The trick for the next month is going to be to find tasks that I can manage single-handedly, as it were. The harsher weather of autumn will soon be here. There's always a lot to do outside and a lot of things that I can do with one hand. Well, that was my week. Didn't go quite according to plan, but when does it ever? Things went so well at the hospital and at the robot doctor that I can't complain. And now I feel better equipped to handle the next big crisis that comes along because there always seems to be a next big crisis. Thanks for watching. Here's to a less eventful week next week, and I will see you in a few days. Bye-bye.